Welcome to Yahoo Finance Sports Report, a unique look at the business of sports, brought to you by Yahoo Finance and Yahoo Sports. I'm your host, Joe Pompliano, and I'm here to coach you through the financial game. Today, we've got Yahoo Sports senior writer Frank Schwab coming back on the show to get a pulse check on the NFL, and Meg Linehan, women's sports lead of The Athletic, joining us to talk about the top stories in women's sports. Let's huddle up and get right into it. We're kicking off this week with Pomp's Playbook, where I take a look at some of the biggest headlines in sports that you and your portfolio need to know. First up, let's talk UFC. The UFC struck a massive 7-year, $7.7 billion deal with Paramount and CBS for its US media rights earlier this week. Starting in 2026, all UFC events will stream exclusively on Paramount+, ending the UFC's previous pay-per-view model with ESPN. Some events will also be simulcast on CBS, including, and I can't believe I'm actually going to say this, the UFC's 4th of July Fight Night taking place on the White House lawn next summer. And speaking of the White House, despite President Trump's tariff, Swiss athletic shoe and apparel company On absolutely crushed Wall Street expectations for its second quarter earnings, with $923 million in Q2 sales, a 32% increase from 2024. Here's what On CEO Martin Hoffman said about the company's ability to navigate the impact of tariffs and raise its full-year guidance on our very own weekday morning show, Market Catalyst.
We are a fast-growing brand, and with that, we have so many opportunities to mitigate that impact that this allows us to increase our margin outlook. It allows us to be very confident that also in the long term, that 60% plus gross profit margin that we laid out 2 years ago is still what we believe in and what we believe we can achieve. And so it becomes part of our business now, having those tariffs.
Next up, Shohei Ohtani has found himself in another legal dispute. According to the Associated Press, the Los Angeles Dodgers superstar and his agent Nez Baleo are being sued for allegedly sabotaging a $240 million real estate project in Hawaii. The lawsuit was filed by a Hawaii real estate investor and broker who alleges that Ohtani and Baleo got the two fired from a luxury housing project that Ohtani was set to endorse. And last up, ESPN and Fox announced earlier this week that the companies will offer a joint bundle for their new streaming services. Starting October 2nd, consumers can buy ESPN's upcoming direct-to-consumer streaming service and the new Fox One DTC streaming app as a bundle for $40 a month, saving $10 in monthly calls. The bundle gives cord cutters and cord nevers yet another option to consider for watching sports in the new age of streaming, which is starting to feel an awful lot like cable. And as football fans decide whether to buy another streaming package from ESPN and Fox for the 2025 NFL season, Yahoo Sports senior writer Frank Schwab joins us to discuss a few burning questions across the league with less than a month to go until regular season kickoff. Frank, thanks so much for joining us today. I'd love to talk about a question that we often think about, but we don't usually have the answer for before the season. Which coaches across the NFL are on the hot seat, like actually on the hot seat for 2025 and could get fired if things turn south?
Yeah, I think we got to start with New York Giants. Brian Daboll almost got fired after last season. They don't come into this season with high hopes. I think everybody's picking them for last place in the NFC East. So the Giants, Brian Daboll, absolutely is number one on that list. There's a few other guys. I think if the Tennessee Titans don't show any improvement, their number one pick, Cam Ward, I think Brian Callahan could be on the hot seat. And one to look for, kind of down the road a little bit, if the Cincinnati Bengals don't make the playoffs again, with Joe Burrow in his prime, I wonder if Zach Taylor's going to be in a little trouble there, because it's hard to have a quarterback play at an MVP level and not make the playoffs. And if the Bengals do that again, I do wonder if Taylor's going to be in a little bit of trouble there.
It hurts me to hear Brian Daboll as a Giants fan. I'm not saying he's the best coach in the world, but you got a new quarterback you're bringing in. You don't want to change it up again. We've already done that with Daniel Jones and some other guys. So I hope that doesn't happen, but we'll see. The other thing I want to talk about is Shedeur Sanders. I mean, it feels like we've been talking about him for weeks now, since the draft, really. But what is going on in Cleveland? It feels like they're sort of in this middle ground where you have Joe Flacco, who's an experienced veteran, who's won a Super Bowl, who is obviously going to be starting for the team. But it feels like they're going to be sort of like a 500 team. The team isn't very good other than a few players. Why wouldn't they just start Shedeur Sanders and see what they have?
Yeah, and I think that's complicated. And I mean, we have to remember that Shedeur started training camp 4th on the depth chart. He wasn't even the first quarterback they picked. They picked Dylan Gabriel in the 3rd round, 2 rounds ahead of Shedeur. So Shedeur Sanders came into camp with a lot of ground to make up to get to the point where he could play at some point this season. I think last week's preseason start really helped him. He looked good. He looked like he belonged on an NFL field, and that was a big step for him. The crazy part is 2.27 million people watched that on NFL Network, with like playoff numbers for other leagues where this is a preseason game. That's how much the Shedeur phenomenon is impacting the NFL already. But like you said, the Browns are expected to be very good, but yet they're going to start the season with Joe Flacco, see if they could get off to a hot start, but they have a really tough schedule. So you do wonder, middle of the season, if they start saying, let's get a look at Shedeur Sanders, let's get a look at Dylan Gabriel. Whoever's higher among those two rookies on the depth chart gets the first crack. And I think at some point this season we will see Shedeur Sanders in a regular season game. It's just not as Browns fans or any other NFL fan who's just clamoring for more Shedeur Sanders stuff to talk about as they would like.
Yeah, it will certainly help with ticket prices, that's for sure. What about Travis Hunter? Obviously, his teammate at Colorado, he comes in with the Jacksonville Jaguars. He played both positions, right? Offense and defense in college. They claim he's going to be doing that in the NFL. He looks like he's more of a wide receiver right now for them than a defensive back, but they played him a little bit there in the preseason. How do you think they do this throughout the regular season?
Yeah, and it's funny. I mean, we talked about Shedeur Sanders a lot. Colorado, I mean, his Colorado teammate, I think, is the biggest story of the NFL season because we've never seen this before, where the guy playing both ways, not to this extent anyway, but we've never seen a guy win a Heisman Trophy playing offense and defense either. The Jaguars traded a lot to move up to the second pick to draft Hunter, and I believe they did so with the mindset of we're getting two players in one right here. And I think they're going to utilize him that way, at least until Hunter struggles or he can't do it physically. But everybody at Jaguars camp has been saying, this guy just doesn't get tired. We practice him on both sides, and he's just fine. In the preseason opener, he played extensive snaps with the starting offense, a lot of snaps with the second-team defense. I think that they're going into the season ready to play him on offense at receiver, defense at cornerback, and I can't wait. We've never really seen anything like this. It's an incredible experiment from a unicorn of an athlete in Travis. I think this is a great thing for the Jacksonville Jaguars, a great thing for the NFL. It is absolutely one of the stories of the season I'm going to be following. And I absolutely expect the Jaguars to use him as much as they can kind of get out of him on offense and defense this year.
Yeah, I mean, I can't wait to see the tracking data from some of his first games where they show how much he ran on offense and defense combined, how many plays he played and everything. But there's so many storylines. Frank, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. I appreciate it.
We have to take a quick break, but when we come back, we've got Meg Linehan, women's sports leader of The Athletic, stopping by the show. Welcome back to Yahoo Finance Sports Report. I'm your host, Joe Pompliano. We've made it to the one-on-one, a conversation where I get to break down news in sports with a key player in the industry. This week, we're speaking with Meg Linehan, women's sports lead at The Athletic and co-host of the Full-Time podcast. Meg, thank you so much for joining us today. I'd like to start with the NWSL. The NWSL, for people who don't follow the league, feels like it's grown a ton over the last number of years. I mean, franchise valuations are up, media rights are up, sponsorships are up, attendance is up, literally everything is up. What is your just like 30,000 foot view of how much the league has grown over the last few years?
Yeah, I mean, as someone who's been around the league since year one, it is night and day considered to where we used to be. But I think it is really interesting of just, what everybody is viewing as explosive growth, whether that's valuations of teams, whether that's expansionship fees, whether that's media rights. There's a lot of like very good, healthy signals of the growth and that growth being overall generally pretty positive. But from my point of view, as someone who's been around the league forever, I think what is really interesting is we've seen some of these other key indicators of the health of the league maybe lag a little behind that, whether that's, attendance numbers are good and they're definitely way better than what they used to be, but are they where they should be? Are TV numbers where they should be? Are the kind of, casual knowledge of the NWSL in the United States, is that where it should be at? And that's where I think the league still has some work to do.
Yeah, and when you think about those numbers specifically, it almost sounds like you think it's sort of a good thing in some regard, right? Because if we look at the WNBA, franchise valuations have exploded, expansion fees have exploded, they got a new media rights deal, but maybe that's like a little too much, whereas the NWSL, some of those things are growing while some others are a little bit more stagnant. Where do you think the league itself can sort of improve to get awareness up when it comes to some of those other items like attendance?
Yeah, I think there's just still a lot of work to be done within markets, right? I mean, this is kind of the challenge is you're going up against men's leagues that have had decades to grow, right? And to become the teams that everybody knows and loves. There's generational fandom. And for a league that's still under basically 15 years old, you just need time on that front. So there's time, but I still think that there's work to be done on the marketing side. I mean, this year, the NWSL kind of honestly made headlines just for having a Times Square billboard, which I think most other leagues would look at and be like, yeah, well, why weren't you doing that before, right? So there are still some of those just basic things, but they've got to get the knowledge up within the markets that they have, because also we're looking at 16 cities across the US. So compare that to NFL or most other major leagues, that's about half. So it's really time, investment, all of those things that aren't necessarily like the most appealing to talk about, but are just necessary to the growth of any league.
Yeah, and as someone who's followed the league for so long, what do you see as helping that, right? What ultimately leads to success, right? And I ask because I moved to Charlotte a couple of years ago, and they obviously have an MLS team, and a lot of people go to the MLS games. I mean, the first game of the season always gets 40, 50, 60,000 people, a little bit less for the rest of the season. But it feels like they had a lot of success just getting people to the games, and then it becomes sort of this regionalized thing, similar to the NWSL, MSL, MLS, et cetera, where you're getting people to the games, and then it's regional rather than national like the NFL. Do you see that attendance is a big factor in sort of driving that fandom?
Yeah, I definitely think if you go to a game, it's really hard to not want to follow the NWSL in general. I think that's a whole reason why after this international break this summer, teams are actually trying to get fans in the door by offering, if you've never been to an NWSL game before, they will give you free tickets to come in because they are so confident that once you're in the door, you're going to want to stay in the door. So that I think is a given. I also don't think it's a bad thing to want to be regionalized. Like I'm up in Burlington,
Yeah.
Vermont. Our local soccer team is USL2. They just won the national championship. It is extremely, if you're in Burlington, Vermont, you know Vermont Green, right? They're trying to start a women's team, all of these things. Being super community focused is not a bad thing. But when you're the NWSL as a league and you want that national recognition, you want to have the cultural influence that the WNBA has, for instance, then regional will only get you so far. The challenge is straddling that line of what will keep your dedicated fans and your community fans in the door without sacrificing like what makes the NWSL special. And that's like such a big question to try to have to grapple with as a league.
Yeah, it feels like every league is sort of trying to determine the national reach versus the regional, and some leagues are doing it well. Some are certainly focusing on one over the other. But you mentioned expansion teams earlier, and there's a couple new teams who are going to be joining the league in 2026 in Boston and Denver. What do you think of the league's expansion process overall, and sort of how they've run that over the last couple of years?
Yeah, Boston is not actually going to be a new market for the NWSL. There was an NWSL team when the league started in Boston that was forced to fold. So it is a return for the NWSL to this market that honestly, like, they did have a hard time cracking it the first time around. I mean, Boston is a team that is a city that loves its sports. There are multiple teams to compete with. So it's going to be really interesting to see if the current version of the NWSL and that product is going to have an easier time cracking that market. Denver, we all know within the women's soccer world as like a hotbed of youth soccer, has produced like insanely talented stars. So Denver to me seems like a market that's going to have a really easy time of, getting a foothold in that community, immediately becoming part of the sports landscape. But from a NWSL higher level perspective, what is really interesting is they don't seem content to be stopping at 16. And so the challenge is finding a timeline where you can continue to add teams, continue to bring in, these multi-million dollar expansion fees without sacrificing the quality on the field. And Commissioner Jessica Berman has said on record, like, well, why couldn't we be as big as the NFL? The challenge is getting there in the right number of years without suddenly you've got four teams coming in at a time and it's just chaos.
Yeah, and I think most casual sports fans, at least, have probably seen the Kansas City Current Stadium over there. Their valuation has obviously increased dramatically because of it. Now they have this women's-specific soccer stadium. I think it was the first of its kind. What have you seen on the ownership front? Have owners been willing to invest more money in their teams and their facilities over the last number of years with sort of this boom in women's sports that we've seen?
Totally. I mean, the investment is really night and day. I mean, between the expansion fees, the valuations, right? Like the money is flowing in, and Kansas City is a really interesting example of this because so much of it was privately funded, right? Like we talk about public funding on the men's sports side a lot in terms of teams wanting new stadiums to upgrade stadiums, whatever it may be. Whereas with Kansas City, this was also, in essence, a real estate play for these owners of saying like, hey, we're going to come in, we're going to spend millions of dollars, not just to build a soccer specific stadium, but also this beautiful training facility as well, and watch that investment pay off basically instantaneously. They were able to host the NWSL championship last year. They're hosting international games. They're probably going to make a play for hosting teams during the 2026 World Cup for the men. So there is an investment piece, but we're also seeing that reward immediately come through for owners who are willing to spend in a way that we never saw in the early days of the NWSL.
I saw a recent article that you wrote on the coaching change for the North Carolina Courage. And essentially, for those who haven't seen the piece yet, it wasn't communicated in the best sense, was my take on it. I'd love to just talk to you about that story specifically and figure out if this was sort of growing pains for the NWSL or if you think it was something different.
Yeah, I mean, growing pains is maybe not quite the right term for it, just because, back in 2021 and to honestly since then, the NWSL is still grappling with this abuse scandal that hit the league. And part of that was because there weren't proper reporting mechanisms. Coaches were allowed to move from team to team. There were a lot of investigations. Like if people are coming into the league more recently, they've seen a lot of the results of what happened in 2021 without maybe necessarily understanding the full history. But what is really interesting is North Carolina Courage was one of the teams that was really impacted by that abuse scandal. Their coach at that time was immediately fired following reporting that we actually did at The Athletic. And so I think there's a zero tolerance thing going on in terms of potential behavior, but also we're seeing kind of the same struggle within the NWSL in terms of communicating why coaches are fired. And I want to also preface this by saying, there's always going to be potential legal issues when you fire anyone or a contract is ended. So there's always going to have to be some level of public transparency, not necessarily being where we would like it to be in the NWSL versus things being properly communicated to players or staffers, whatever that is. So there's that piece of it. But the way that North Carolina Courage handled it was one of the most combative press conferences I've ever been a part of. Just kind of, it was so strange. And it was a reminder of some of the really painful days that this league has had. And one team's behavior can also reflect on the league as a whole. And that's where the NWSL can get into trouble a lot of the time.
Yeah, and lastly, I'd love to just hear your thoughts on sort of like what the NWSL can do from a growth perspective, sort of going back to what we were discussing earlier. Obviously, the Men's World Cup is coming here next summer. We just had the Club World Cup this past summer. There's a lot of talk about how MLS is going to benefit from this. How do you think NWSL also benefits from just more people watching soccer in general?
Yeah, I think there's always, that mutual boost, no matter what it is. I think we always see more of a boost off of the Women's World Cup. The next one of those is 2027 in Brazil. But obviously, you see these massive waves of interest coming off of 2023 when the U.S. Women's National Team won in both 2015 and 2019. There were massive spikes coming off of those two things. But I think hosting the tournament in the United States, it's going to be expensive to go to a World Cup, right? So I think MLS will benefit, but also NWSL will in terms of affordability. Again, in terms of feeling like if you get someone in the door, if you're able to come up with that ticket promo or whatever it is to get someone in the door, that they're going to want to stay. And knowing that the NWSL, even compared to MLS, is stacked with some of the world's biggest international talent, with so many of the U.S. Women's National Team players. There's a lot of room here for the NWSL to honestly force its way into the conversation around 2026. And we've started to see it too, where host cities are leaning on NWSL players to be part of their committees around what host cities will be doing. So I feel encouraged, but the big challenge for the NWSL in the moment of next summer is how do they play through a men's international tournament being hosted here in the US? And we haven't quite seen the answer to that yet. They're starting to trickle out some details about how they're thinking about doing this. But just from a logistical standpoint, they're going to have a tough time. But if they can figure it out and figure it out well, then they really do stand to benefit.
Yeah, having that happen at the same time might actually be beneficial. But there's so much money flowing into women's sports in general, and you guys are right at the center of it at The Athletic. So Meg, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
The clock is winding down here, but we have just enough time for some final buzz. According to a recent feature story from Cindy Kuzma at Front Office Sports, endurance athletes are turning to an unexpected snack to fuel their performance. Apparently, a classic snack with a little snap, crackle, and pop has become the go-to fuel source for endurance athletes. Yes, I'm talking about Rice Krispie treats. Front Office Sports spoke to multiple endurance athletes and sports nutrition experts to confirm that the Rice Krispie treats trend is indeed real. Professional runner Molly Huddle even told FOS that she eats a box of 16 Rice Krispie treats before running marathons. Here's the gist of it. Most runners and cyclists consume mass loads of easily digestible carbs before races and training sessions to ensure that they have enough glycogen stored in their muscles that their bodies can turn the glucose into performance fuel. Many of these endurance athletes will also eat simple carbohydrates during competition to stay energized, sometimes between 90 to 120 carbs per hour. However, products like energy gels and chews can cost anywhere from $2 to $5 per serving, not to mention that they may not taste all that great either. And that's where Rice Krispie treats come in. At 30 cents a piece, the Kellogg snack gives endurance athletes an affordable fueling option packed with simple carbohydrates that also happens to taste pretty good. And while there's no hard data on how much endurance athletes are spending on Rice Krispie treats, Kellanova, the parent company behind the kid snack, said in the 2024 company presentation that buyers are spending 33% more on Rice Krispie treats compared to 2018. So the next time someone tells you to put down that Rice Krispies treat, just tell them that you're fueling up for a run or a bike ride. We're all out of time, so it's officially game over for this week. Thank you so much to Frank, Meg, and for all of you for joining us. Please make sure to scan the QR code below to follow Yahoo Finance Podcast for more videos and expert insights. And catch us every Friday wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Joe Pompliano. See you next time.
This content was not intended to be financial advice and should not be used as a substitute for professional financial services.